this is Steve, and I'm recording again from my study here at our... This is Steve, and I'm recording from my study here at our house in Troy, Illinois. This is a difficult one for me to share with everyone. It's very personal, and yet a very powerful message. At the time that I wrote the original version of this, I was living alone in my little rental house in Wood River, Illinois. When I first returned to the area in 2005, I was attending classes at Lewis and Clark Community College. I graduated in the spring of 2009 wearing a gold rope across the stage. I attended and took my turn in the pulpit at the Hartford East Maple Street Chapel as I could. That was the former Hartford Church of Christ that I had grown up and been baptized in. Drove a truck 10 to 12 hours every day to pay the bills, and still managed to fend for myself day to day, doing my laundry, shopping, cooking, cleaning, etc., just like thousands or hundreds of thousands of other people do every day. In the original 2008 version, I mentioned how strange the weather had been that year. But I have no recollection of what I'd been referring to. As I write today, Christmas Day 2022, the temperature outside is up to 16 degrees. That's Fahrenheit for my readers in other countries. While the last 2 days have seen highs in the single digits and lows down to -8. And just as the temps began to plummet, the boiler that heats our house decided it didn't like working that hard and decided to take a break. So I have been kept busy dealing with alternate heating sources, frozen pipes, and a water heater that decided to start leaking not long before all of this. So it is that the peace of a Christmas morning that I describe here is sorely lacking this year, at least in my little parcel of the globe. Further, when I first thought of rewriting and recording this, I had the notion of setting our huge brush pile outside to burn in the early a.m., let it burn through the day, then set up to record in front of it as it died down during the evening. But I'm sorry, I am not sitting out there in 10-degree weather. So, here I am, still in my office, dressed to stay warm on Christmas morning 2022. And bear with me in my cough and possibly even blow my nose, because I think we've got it up to 58 or 60 right now. As I said, the original version of this was written in 2008 and given on December 28th of that year at the little church at Hartford that I had grown up in. And, as I prophesied here, he's now gone. I also posted the original manuscript on this site on December 26, 2019. though I have rewritten parts of this version to bring it up to date. I also need to point out that portions of this were written very specifically to that congregation. But for the most part, I've chosen to leave them intact, since the general concepts can apply to every one of us. The verses I'm going to read are from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 14. And as usual, I'm reading from the NIV. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that men will revere him. The weather in the fall, early winter of 2008 had been really strange. I had worked late on a project the Wednesday night before Christmas that year. So it was around 7:30 or 8 in the morning when I got up and going on Christmas Day. As I'm sure many of you know, waking up all alone to a silent Christmas morning can be a bit disheartening. So the first thing I did was just open up the front door to see if I might be able to sit on the porch for a little bit. That early, it was still a bit cool, but not too bad. So I went out and was just awestruck at how quiet it was. There were no cars, No train or factory or plant sounds in the distance. No radios or boom boxes blaring at the laundromat across the street. I walked to the sidewalk, then all the way across Wood River Avenue in just my sweats and my moccasins, and never heard a sound or saw a soul. My first thought was it was the silence of the dead. But I immediately changed that. What I was experiencing was the peace of a Christmas morning. Now, I know that the date that the world chooses to celebrate the birth of Christ has absolutely no biblical base. Just as I know that the celebration of his birth has absolutely nothing to do with our salvation. But still, isn't it great to have at least one day a year when the majority of the world stops and recognizes the mystery and ponders the meaning of the Christ child? And for just a few minutes that morning, I was able to literally feel that mystery and magic in the very air around me, as I personally experienced at least a total peace in that part of Wood River, Illinois, at that moment of time. I said that the weather that year has been really strange. But it hadn't been the only thing, at least for me. Indeed, I would have to say that much of those last 3 years had been rather strange for me. You see, it had been just over 3 years before when I made the decision to leave behind every aspect of the life that I had spent some 30-odd years building and start all over again. And so it was that I found myself living back in the town where I had grown up as a child, attending the church that had been so central to that childhood, and going to school. Talk about deja vu all over again. Much of it has been almost like learning to walk all over again. Except that this time, I've had to teach myself, with nobody there to catch me each time I've fallen. And if anything has gotten easier from all of this, it's been learning how to fall. Anyway, as I was saying, there have just been a number of strange things to deal with sometimes. One recent example might be how the instructor of one class this last semester docked me for not being creative enough, while another instructor got on me about being too creative. So much so that other students in the class started to take issue with him and defend me. So what you learn from that is that if you want to be creative, you have to be true to yourself and not worry so much about what others might think. And to anyone that knows me, that has never been a problem for me. I've made some new friends this last year or so, but I seem to have lost even more. Some just seem to go by the wayside, while others, well, I'll just say that it was very strange to get a call from people I knew in Jacksonville one day telling me that my best and oldest friend had been found dead in his bed that morning. He'd had a heart attack, and living alone like me, there was no one there to help him or call for help. That really makes a body stop and think. We've also lost some very special people here in the last 3 to 4 years. So many, in fact, that some are given cause to wonder about the future of our little group here. As well they should. I mean, consider with me for a moment. For the most part, I'm one of the youngsters here each Sunday. But you know what? One of the hardest but most important lessons I've come to terms with, or should I say tried to come to terms with, is that no matter what happens, God is in control. Even when we mess up and just get things completely wrong, He can still take that and help us to learn and make the most of it. Some of you may remember the song that put many of the words of these verses that I chose today to music. Indeed, I remember very distinctly sitting here in this church building one Sunday morning in the mid-60s and discovering them in the concordance of my Bible and realizing for the first time that they were biblical. Let me read them again. Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 14. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and do good while they live. That everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken away. God does it so that men will revere him. When I first started attending classes again, I felt that I could probably proficiency out of many of them. That is, just taking the test for the credit, but not actually taking the class. But decided that spending the time in a classroom environment would probably be a good experience for me. And while I feel like I was right on both counts, I have to say that there has not been one class that I did not learn something in. And most of them, I learned a lot. And I'm not talking about just facts and figures here. I'm talking about learning things about myself that I didn't know. Learning and discovering skills and talents that I never suspected. And on occasion, recognizing that there are some that I just do not have. God has been teaching me. When I first started attending here again, and I'm talking about the little church in Hartford in 2008, it was with the hope that I might be able to study and relearn many of those lessons taught me as a child, but seemed to have grown foggy over the years. But many of the teachers that I grew up with are either no longer with us or are just unable to perform that function any longer. But again, you know what? God has seen to it that I still have been learning the lessons I've needed to learn, even if much of the learning has been on my own. Next Sunday is the first of a new year. And I predict that sometime within the next 24 months, and possibly much less, the subject of the future of this little group of faithful followers, again I'm talking specifically to that little church in 2008, will begin to take on more and more importance. First, our attendance will continue to shrink as more of us are no longer able to be here. But even more than that, I fear that we may soon be unable to fill the leadership and teaching roles for each service. Indeed, there may well come a Sunday in the not too distant future that we might not be able to fill this lectern on a regular basis. Why is that? Because our fire is all but gone out. There is barely a spark left. Maybe enough to get each of us here the rest of the distance we need to go with our own lives. But certainly not enough for anyone outside to see. And I know of which I speak. For my fire has been ebbing for some time now. I've had 2 friends this last year take me to task for reusing some of my old talks instead of studying and writing a new one each time. And though I may argue that they are good talks with a good message, and that I just don't always have the time to put towards assembling a proper study, in the end, I have to admit that they are right. Because the biggest reason I have sometimes chose to recycle material is that my fire for doing God's work was down to a dull glow. And I think it's time we all start to do something about it. Verses excuse me. Verses 12 and 13 say that I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy to do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. It is time that we start being active Christians again. Let's get someone local here to contact the city and other organizations and offer the use of this building for things like scout packs and after-school study programs. Let's start putting together some neighborhood potlucks and our meals during the week. And then get out and make sure the neighborhood knows about it. I, for one, would love to set up and do the weekly Bible study I wrote using old TV westerns as the base, and open and advertise it to the general public. Let's see if we can get some singing groups organized to make local appearances around the area and show people what voices can do without a piano or organ. Let's get started right now planning some kind of vacation Bible school for this next year. Let's do something. Most congregations and denominations that celebrate Christmas use it as one of their strengthening times of the year. They know that if nothing else, many of their members will attend at least at Christmas and at Easter. But those ones who are successful, the ones who have masses of people attending and taking part throughout the year, are the ones who are true to the ideal that following Christ is not a part-time thing. It is not something you can concentrate on once or twice a year and think that's enough. The only Christian that Jesus will recognize is the Christian who follows the Lord's leading 24/7 until their dying day. These verses from Ecclesiastes tell us that there is a time to everything under heaven. And I say to you that unless we make this a time to plant, a time to heal, a time to speak and embrace and love, then it will most assuredly become a time for us as a congregation to die. As I said at the beginning, I've left most of this just as I wrote it in 2008. But I think everyone will see how it can be applied to themselves and their own congregations. So let me just add and close with this. I truly love the lights, brightness, happiness, and the magic, if you will, of the Christmas season. But it is imperative that we remember that Jesus never told us to remember and or celebrate his birth. If this time of year helps some to think about and ponder the mysteries of Christ and his Father, then fine and well. But it is only through the death of Christ and his resurrection that we are saved. Amen.